Constitutional Court has declared the Traditional and Khoi Leadership Act unconstitutional. The court says Parliament failed to ensure public participation before passing the act. It's been challenged on procedural grounds as rural citizens feel the public participation process that was conducted by Parliament was inadequate and excluded their voices. But what does this judgment mean for rural communities? For more on this, I'm joined by the Legal Resource Centre's co-lead of the land programme, Wilmien Wicomb. Thank you so much for your time this evening. So, Parliament failed to ensure public participation before passing the Khoi Leadership Act. Tell us more about this case.
So this case was brought by traditional communities, members of traditional communities so this act was preceded by legislation from 2003, which already regulated traditional leadership and governance in the rural areas and created many serious problems. And so when this new legislation came before Parliament and, to incorporate Khoi and San leadership, communities sought to make their voices heard to Parliament and say, look, this is the moment to rectify some of the damage that was done through the previous legislation. And yet those voices somehow just did not get through to the parliamentary process. And many people, of course, didn't even know about these hearings happening. And so for communities whose everyday life, every aspect of their lives really are being impacted by this legislation, this was unacceptable. And the outcome was legislation that they say only exaggerates the problems that they're already facing under traditional authorities. And so for this reason, they approached the Constitutional Court and said, this process was unconstitutional, and the court agreed.
So the court has given Parliament 24 months to reenact the legislation or to start again. Are you satisfied with this?
Yes, well, we will be satisfied if Parliament this time follows a proper process and really encourages affected people to communicate what they want in the legislation and how the legislation could work for them on the ground. And if that process is followed properly, then hopefully the outcome will be better legislation. But we'll have to see whether Parliament does the job this time round.
What are some of the implications of this ruling for rural communities?
So I think one of the biggest issues for communities about the legislation is that it is really disempowering of community members. So if you have a traditional authority or leadership that is not acting in the best interests of the community or excluding some community members, it often has to do with disposal of land and other resources, then community members have absolutely no mechanism of doing something about it, of holding their leaders to account. They're completely, their hands are tied. It's up to the state, normally the premier, to intervene, which very rarely happens. And so what communities are saying is we want the power to be able to hold our own leaders to account. And now with this ruling, they hopefully get a second chance to get this message to the legislature and for the legislature to act in a way that, is responsive to the needs of the people who will be impacted by this legislation.
Well, thank you so much for that update. That was the Legal Resources Centre's co-lead of the land programme, Wilmien Wicomb.